The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today marks the 50th anniversary of the date of the assassination in Memphis of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. King was in Memphis to support the Memphis sanitation workers' strike, which he was moved to and joined by the poverty-level wages of the sanitation workers. Martin Luther King called in the campaign that led to the March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech for a $2 minimum wage. Adjusted for inflation, that would be $15.73 today. Will the Premier agree to honouring the legacy of Dr. King by revising his previous position and establishing a path that would get Nova Scotia to a $15 minimum wage over the next 3 years?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand and rise, Mr. Speaker, to talk about Dr. King. Mr. Speaker, in a few months, in early June, we'll also be the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Robert Kennedy. I think the world was changed when those two men were taken way too young in their pursuit, quite frankly, not only changed the lives of America, but I believe changed the global community. I just listened before I came over here to a tribute to Dr. King by one of the people who were actually with him on that particular day. And the very things they focused on, Mr. Speaker, were good jobs and quality education, to find their way out of poverty, to find their way out of racism and discrimination in any global community. It will be driven through the power of education and the power of economic prosperity, Mr. Speaker. It's why we've continued in this budget to drive investment in public education. It's why we're ensuring, Mr. Speaker, that we continue, regardless of the socio-economic circumstances you are born into this province, you will have access to play-based pre-primary program, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue, Mr. Speaker, not only to honour the legacy of Dr. King, Mr. Speaker, we're going to ensure that every Nova Scotian feels empowered and welcomed in this province as we continue to make change.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Dr. King came to Memphis from his work with the great defining work of the last chapter of his life, which was called the Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign was a major mobilization across the United States calling for dramatic levels of anti-poverty investments from the government. And it would be a singular way to honour Dr. King's legacy if the Premier would today commit to double the budget for income supports in Nova Scotia, thereby dramatically improving the incomes of the poorest people in our province. Is this a commitment that the Premier is prepared to make?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank again the honourable member for the question. I want to push it back to the budget that we're actually debating today, Mr. Speaker, the investments that we have continued to make in affordable housing, continue to reduce the wait list. There's another additional 400 rent supplements that are in place to provide low-income Nova Scotians with access to housing. Mr. Speaker, we've exempted child support, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to income assistance payments. That's a substantial amount of money that we're leaving in the families of low-income Nova Scotians. We're continuing, Mr. Speaker, to work inside of our system to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we provide everyone with the tools required to move themselves out of poverty, Mr. Speaker. We have a different view when it comes to what the minimum wage should be in this province, but we are addressing it in what we believe are meaningful, concrete steps to individual families today, Mr. Speaker, that are impacting them in a positive way in Nova Scotia. And in the pursuit of that, Mr. Speaker, we're providing the pre-based play program regardless of your socioeconomic circumstances. So those children who are born into poverty, Mr. Speaker, will be judged on the content of their mind and their character, Mr. Speaker, because we've given them an opportunity to strive and achieve all they can be in this province, Mr. Speaker, by not giving them anything but, Mr. Speaker, support and a hand up.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today there will be an abundance of quotations from Dr. King that will be being remembered internationally. One of them will be this: of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health care is the most shocking and inhuman. Mr. Speaker, Canada is the only country with socialized medicine in the world which doesn't also have a socialized drug plan. And today in Nova Scotia, close to 100,000 people can't afford to fill their prescriptions. It would be a fitting tribute to Dr. King if on this day the Premier would commit to adding our province's voice to the calls across our country for a national pharmacare plan. I would like to ask the Premier if this is something he's prepared to do.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I verbalized this in many parts of the country, Mr. Speaker, in this province. It is the next phase of continuing to build a healthcare system that has access for all. I believe a national pharmacare program is an appropriate step to move forward. I know the health ministers across the country will be meeting when they do. I know our province will be proudly represented by a strong voice by the Minister of Health to ensure that we continue down that road, to ensure that we make sure this healthcare system is fair for all Canadians and all Nova Scotians.